meeting of the licensing subcommittee. First of all, many apologies for the delay. We did have problems of members of the public being able to access any paperwork which has to be available for people to be able to read. We have now resolved those problems, and thank you for your patience on that. Before we go into the meeting itself, if through the webcasting introduction. I would like to remind everyone present that this meeting will be broadcast live to the internet or filmed and will be capable of repeated viewing or other use such as by third parties. Please could I also remind members of the public who have registered to speak that they will be admitted to the meeting at the appropriate time. And please also be aware, and this one is, as we've just discovered, if any technical difficulties interrupt the meeting that cannot be overcome, I may need to adjourn the meeting. So apologies for absence. I don't believe we have any.
None, Chairman.
Thank you. And any declarations of interest on this item? No, thank you very much. So the procedure for the business of the meeting is set out on page 5 to 10 of the agenda. We've got 4 councillors who sit as a member of this subcommittee, but only 3 will sit on the applications being heard this morning. Myself as chairman, Councillor Mary Sartin, Councillor Alan Lyon and Councillor Paul Stalker. We also have present Councillor Richard Morgan, who is the 4th member, who will not be sitting on these applications, will not be taking any part in the discussions, but I believe will sit in on the meeting. And I will just mention that we also have Councillor Helen Kane, but she is not here as a district councillor, but as an Waltham Abbey town councillor. I'll just run through the procedure for the meeting. The lead officer will outline the matter in hand. The applicants or the representatives of the applicants will present their case with or without witnesses. They can then be questioned by members of the committee and also by any objectors or people making representation who might be present at the meeting. The objectors or those who put in representations will also be able then to make representation. Questions can be asked of them by the members of the committee, but also by the applicants. And then the objectors will be able to make a final statement without introducing any new issues. And finally, the applicant will have the opportunity to make a final statement again without introducing any new evidence. At that point, the members, the 3 of us who've sat on this hearing, will meet together. The rest of those present will be put into a waiting room while we discuss the application before everybody is brought back again to hear the decision. Can I first of all, before we go any further, just ask those who are here representing the applicant themselves and any representative just to identify who you are and what your position is.
Good morning, Madam Chairman. My name is Sarah Clover. I'm the barrister who is presenting the variation application, and then later on in your agenda, an application or a presentation, I should say, of a temporary events notice. I'm accompanied today by Nick Thompson via video, who is the applicant, the licensee, and also Hayley Rogerson, his wife, and Andy Grimsey, who is the solicitor who instructs me from Poppleston Allen Solicitors. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And those who are making representations or objections, you can just identify yourself. Ronan?
Yes, good morning, Ma'am. I'm Ronan McManus from Essex Police Licensing.
Thank you. Councillor Holmes?
Yes, I'm putting in an objection about what's ahead today.
I'm representing Waltham Abbey Town Council.
Right. And Councillor Helen Kane.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm here as an observer only.
Thank you. And I'm just looking to see other names I've got here. Alison Taylor.
I work for Hayley and Nick. I'm just here as an observer.
So again, not taking any part in any of the discussions. Thank you. Can I just check there's anybody that I've missed? Don't believe so. No? Thank you very much. So we have item 5 on the agenda, which is the J26 diner at Skillet Hill, Honey Lane, Waltham Abbey. And if I can ask Hannah Gould to present the application.
Yes, hello. So an application has been made by Nick Thompson of Connaught Hill, Loughton, Essex, IG10 4DU for a variation to the premises licence at Junction 26 Diner, Skillet Hill Farm, Honey Lane, Waltham Abbey, EN9 3QU. The proposed variation looks to remove a condition imposed on the current licence, which is under Annex 2, and restricts the number of customers to 40 at any one time. They'd like to increase the limit of people to 150, which will both be seated inside and out. The application was received on the 18th of March this year. The responsible authorities have received a copy. It was also advertised at the premises and in the local newspaper. The authority has received one objection from Essex Police, which relates to the prevention of crime and disorder and the public safety objectives. An objection was received from Waltham Abbey Town Council, which relates to the prevention of crime and disorder, public safety, and the prevention of public nuisance. Essex County Fire and Rescue Service did make recommendations concerning the occupancy numbers inside the premises, and that the premises should be restricted to a maximum of 60 persons at any one time, including the staff and the customers. However, they didn't wish to make a formal representation. All details are attached, and the subcommittee is asked to determine the application having regard to the content of this report and its representations, any additional information obtained during the hearing, the Council Statement of Licensing Policy and guidance issued by the Secretary of State, and the steps appropriate to promote the licensing objectives. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. So if I can now go to the applicant's agent, I believe, Sarah, if you could present the applicant's case. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good morning to you and your colleagues, Mum. There's a little bit of context to this, which I would just want to set out for your sort of fuller understanding, although we are specifically dealing with a permanent variation application for the licence today. And I should say, as previously mentioned, I've got Mr. Thompson here and Mrs. Rogerson as well, who are able to answer any questions, but the anticipation is that I would do the whole presentation. And you've got a temporary event notice to consider straight after this one, but there was also, and you may well be aware of this, a temporary event notice submission back in March, which was objected to by the police and was refused, and that's currently going forward to appeal. Now, the only reason I mention that is because this is in a sense a rerun of that previous 10 submission, and the police made very similar objections in relation to that 10, and it was declined on 2 grounds that related to safety. Health and safety concerns in this particular context are completely understandable. But what I'm essentially here to do today is to reassure you in relation to those health and safety concerns, which were the only concerns that stuck, that went forward on the last occasion, and if need be, will go before the magistrates on appeal. So the variation is really to change the status of the diner on a long-term ongoing basis. Originally, when this licence was granted back in 2010, it was refused by the council entirely. It went forward to the magistrates at that stage, and the magistrates granted a licence. So they effectively established the principle of a licence on these premises. And that, again, at the time was all in relation to safety concerns, health concerns. So you've got that baseline, essentially, that magistrates in 2010 found that it was acceptable in principle to have a licence here. And the condition went on at the time that there should be 40 persons. Now, that was in the context of the diner as it was at that time. There's no suggestion that the magistrates were trying to fix that limit for all time. And of course, they wouldn't be able to do that anyway. So fast forward now to 2021, and we're looking at the diner as it currently is and it currently operates, and of course with a bit of COVID context as well, because the limit for persons indoors will be set in actual fact, as you've already heard, by the fire regulations. And that's a given. And that's not something that the licensing committee would want to interfere with, and it wouldn't be necessary to do so. So fire have written in to confirm that the limits indoors would be 60 persons. And the rest of the potential, I'm not suggesting there'd be 150 people every single day. This is for capacity and flexibility. The rest would be outdoors. And what's happened to cater for COVID restrictions is that more seating has been provided outdoors. There's more capacity for people to sit outdoors. And the diner, as you very well may know, is situated on a truck park, which is operated by Hayley and Nick. There's a truck business that Mr. Thompson runs there as well. And the facility is primarily for drivers, truck drivers through the week who want refreshment. They park up, they might stay overnight in their vehicles, they want something to eat, they want something to drink. And obviously they've had to keep on moving through these COVID restrictions and had to be accommodated outdoors on these tables and chairs. And that's the requirement for the additional capacity there. At the same time, Nick and Hayley have also held some events, which have been very successful. They've had a couple of events in 2019. The police have raised an issue with an event in August of 2020. Now, the problem with that was that it fell outside the terms of the licence. So although I think the police have presented it and Waltham Town Council have presented it even more so as something in the nature of an illegal rave, that's not the right way to look at it at all. What happened was that an event was held. The licence, I think there was some misunderstanding, the licence pertained only to the inside of the premises. The alcohol should have been on the premises, not off the premises, and there was no facility for music. So it went outside the terms of the licence. The reason the police were called was not any of that. The police were called because somebody thought that they had seen illegal immigrants getting off a lorry, which wasn't the case. As the police turned up, identified that what was happening was outside the terms of the licence. There was a warning letter written. I think the police made reference to drugs. I'm not entirely sure where that's come from, because I don't think the original objection or the original report was in relation to drugs. There's never been any evidence served in relation to drugs, and we don't know where that came from. That's not accepted. So that was the August 2020 episode. To the extent that that's been blown out of context into illegal raves or anything of that sort, that's not the case. So there have been some events, they've been successful. Hayley and Nick would like to do further events. They've got the 10 in at the moment, which is intended to be used for the 26th of June. There will be an appeal in the magistrates before that, so we'll be able to identify whether that's going to go ahead or not. And the reasons that 10 was said not to be suitable to go ahead were two reasons. And I raise that now because they're going to be the same reasons that you're looking at, both in relation to the variation and the 10 that is in front of you today. And it seems to me that it's the It's the pinnacle of the objector's case, as it were, because those are the reasons that the committee agreed with last time. And the first one is conflict between pedestrians and vehicles. That's the first identified concern, that either for these increased numbers of diners in the variation, or indeed for an event that might take place, there might be some conflict between people moving around, getting from their vehicle into the diner, and or people enjoying an event, and then vehicles moving around, particularly HGVs. And on the face of it, it's a legitimate concern. However, it has been comprehensively dealt with, both in the context of their variation and in the context of the temporary event. And as far as the temporary event is concerned, and the one you're dealing with after this variation is the same date, it's also the 26th of June. And when the time comes, I'll explain why you've got another temporary event submission in front of you for that same date. But for that particular date, 26th of June, you've got a comprehensive event management plan. And a key part of that is to stop the vehicles moving, stop the trucks from moving at all. So once they come in, there will be no further movements of the trucks, of any HGV, of any vehicle that might conflict with a pedestrian, from 2 hours before the event begins to 2 hours after it ends. So all vehicles will be static. The only vehicles will be the cars that are delivering event goers to the site. So that takes care of vehicle pedestrian conflict in that context. And obviously a variation would admit of a certain number of events taking place. They're not going to be particularly frequent or regular. It's to apply the flexibility to do so, rather than having to come back for tens every time it's wanted. In terms of what I think the police objection is saying about conflict between pedestrians and vehicles generally, I think there was some concern from the photographs. Well, look at the cones and safety of people outdoors, and it hasn't been preserved and so on. I need you to think in terms of what is standard and expected in this kind of situation between vehicles and pedestrians. Think of a motorway service station. Think of a supermarket, for example. You've got people exiting their vehicle, navigating their way across a car park to the intended point of destination, which might be the motorway service station. It might be Tesco, Asda, other supermarkets are available. It might be wherever they're going to go. Everybody is completely used to and acclimatized to navigating their space, whether they're in a vehicle or whether they're a pedestrian. So the idea that for J26 Diner, all of a sudden everybody will be throwing themselves under vehicles is completely misguided. That simply is not the case. It's never been a problem here before. For 40 diners, 40 attendees coming in their vehicles, going into the diner, having something to eat and drink, coming back out again, getting into their vehicle and go away again. Since 2010, no accidents, no incidents, nothing of that sort. And so we have to kind of get ourselves out of the mentality of there's bound to be a problem, something that I call catastrophizing, because we have to look at the reality of the situation. Drivers and pedestrians are perfectly used to dealing with these communal garden situations. There's a parking space, there's a car park, they get out, they move safely, they look where they're going, cars look where they're going, and everybody gets to where they need to be quite safely. So that would not be a reason from a health and safety point of view to refuse an extension of the numbers of people at this diner on a general basis, which is what this variation is all about. So that really is the variation. The police, I think, were also concerned about extending numbers in the building. I think I've dealt with that in relation to the fire numbers that would apply. The police also talked about this is going to become a regular crime and disorder hotspot. I take issue with that. because the evidence that appears to be presented to you about crime and disorder hotspot seems to be solely related to the August 2020 event, which I've already described. Now, the primary conflict with law and regulation there was not having a license. So by granting a license, you don't turn it into a regular crime hotspot. You actually take away the only reason that it was a crime in the first place, because it was unlicensed. So I'm not quite sure of the police logic there, and I'm sure that will be explained a little bit further in due course. The only other crime that was even mentioned in the context of that event, and never at any other time, may I emphasize, there's never been any other suggestion of a crime or disorder episode at these premises, was the allegation about drugs. Now, that's at its height, taken as an allegation at its height in relation to one occasion only. We've seen no evidence or substantiation of it. So again, this suggestion that by granting a license it becomes a crime and disorder hotspot is very much overblown and entirely rejected. And to the extent, as I say, that the town council has amplified that into multiple raves, plural raves, that's simply not the case. Now, the police, based on the correspondence that I've seen, would have agreed conditions for this variation. There is correspondence that's flown backwards and forwards where the police have actually agreed a set of conditions for this variation application. And it may well be that we can ask PC McManus about this in due course. That offer to agree conditions appears to have gone off the table when the original 10 temporary event submission was made. And there appears to have been this attitude of, well, we'll wait to see what happens on the 10. And now, because the committee refused to endorse the original temporary event, now the objection to the variation is maintained. And there's an element of chicken and egg there, which I'm not entirely clear about. And it may be that we can clear that up today, because if conditions would have been suitable and the police had got as far as endorsing that, I'm not entirely clear why we've rowed back from that situation. Just dealing then, and then I'm nearly finished on the variation point, just dealing then specifically with the Waltham Abbey Town Council objection. I've talked about their concern about crime and disorder and raves and so forth. The other two issues appear to be there's going to be congestion at this junction and there's not enough parking. Well, it's the quintessential character of this location that it's all about parking. The one thing that it has in superabundance is parking. That's what it's there for. So quite why it would have insufficient parking for this additional number of people on a regular basis, it is not clear. And that wasn't an objection made to the temporary event notice, that there was insufficient parking. The complaint and the concern there was how everybody was going to navigate and manage that enormous parking space. So it seems to be unarguable that there is sufficient parking and that is not going to be a problem. Congestion in relation to the junction, well, we're not talking about 150 people turning up at the same time so far as the diner is concerned on a regular basis. So far as the weekend events are concerned, that has been dealt with comprehensively by a very professionally produced events management plan. And in that event management plan for the increased activity, we're not talking about HGVs in this context, we're talking about regular vehicles delivering event goers to and from the premises. And it would be primarily cars that would deliver them. We're not expecting a huge amount of attendance on foot. The venue doesn't lend itself to that. So for the vehicles, for the cars that would be attending, taxis, there's an arrangement with a local taxi firm so they can filter to ensure there isn't excessive build-up. There's also dedicated taxi marshals, members of staff who are going to be dedicated to the parking area, banksmen trained, people getting the vehicles in efficiently and getting them on site and making sure there's no conflict. But the nature of the junctions that we're talking about, this will be like a flyby on those junctions in the context of the capacity the M25 and associated junctions have actually got. If you looked at the empirical capacity of those junctions, it would vastly exceed anything that this dyno could possibly contribute. It's a drop in the ocean. So that again is not upheld as a fair to make the point, but it's not upheld as a realistic objection here, and it's not a reason to refuse the variation. So if I pause there, I hope I've dealt with all the particular points. What we've asked for is that you have all together in one place all the paperwork and the documentation that is available for the temporary event notice, and all the paperwork that's available for the variation, because it makes a certain amount of sense for you to do that in the round, because essentially what you're doing for the variation is curtailing the need for a temporary event notice, because the variation is built to contain the activity that is sought on a permanent basis. If I leave it there, as I say, Hayley and Nick are here to answer any questions that you may have, and I'll do my best to assist as well. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much for that introduction to the application. If I can now go to Councillor Lyon, any questions?
Not particularly on this at this stage, thank you.
Councillor Stalker?
No, thank you.
Can I just ask a question around the plans that we have on page 26 and 27 of the application, of the paperwork? Normally we'd expect to see the licensed areas that have been brought forward to be coming under the license outlined in red. The ones on page 26 are, my understanding was that the upstairs of the premises would also be part of the licensed area. It's not outlined in red. Can I just check that is the intention? Yes. Sorry, you're
Yes.
on mute.
Yes, sorry. Yes, I believe that it is. I'll be corrected if I'm wrong, but I think if you've got helicopter plans, as it were, sometimes that's not entirely clear. But I'll be corrected if I'm wrong. But yes, I believe it's all to be licensed with a 60 capacity indoors,
and also 60 capacity indoors. But also we don't really get a good indication from the plan as to how much of the outside area is expected to be coming under the licensed thing. I did do a site visit yesterday, and it showed that the events would be taking place over a much larger area than seems to be shown on this, because obviously within the plan that we've got is also included the veranda area, which isn't immediately marked out on this plan.
I'm struggling just at the moment, Madam Chair, because you're talking about page 26 and I've got the variation bundle in front of me, which only goes up to page 24. So are you perhaps looking at a different bundle to me?
Page 12.
No.
There's plans shown after page 24, which are marked page 25 in the bundle, but page 11 on the 11.
In the variation, I've got it. Yes, I've got it as page 11 and page 12. Yeah. The red line, I'm slightly confused, Madam Chairman, because the red line appears pretty clear on my. Are you asking how extensive that area is on page 12 in scale terms?
It's because the veranda area doesn't appear to be shown on this plan. It's difficult to identify how much of it is actually outside area. Is the veranda area included in, perhaps this is a question for our officers as well, is the veranda area included in the inside of the premises, or is it part of the outside of the premises? Is it included in the 60 maximum, or is it?
Oh, I see what you mean. I don't know if any of those instructing me would like to jump in on this. I'm not entirely clear, and I'd have to look at the
outside.
It's outside and it's marked as sheltered patio area.
Not on the plan that I'm looking at. Are you looking at the plans for the 10s?
That is correct, Chair. On the plans for the variation, the patio area isn't shown, but it is classed as outside. Clearly, it is outside the main building, but it's clearly within the perimeter line, if you like, of as delineated on page 26.
Thank you. And on that basis, and again, we've got this problem of these two applications coming up one after the other with separate paperwork, but the TENS shows a much larger area of outside space coming in for that. Presumably for the variation, this is a much smaller area.
Yes, where the bollards were yesterday, I showed you.
Right. Just wondering if there's anything else before I pass over to the objectors.
Sorry, Madam Chair, can I ask a question?
Yes, Councillor Lyon.
Because it wasn't marked on these plans that the upstairs was going to be used, we're talking about a 60 capacity inside the building. So are there any limits on the upstairs in terms of capacity?
I'm not aware of any. I'll be corrected if I'm wrong. My understanding was that the 60 would be spread within the internal building, whether they're upstairs or downstairs or wherever they happen to be.
The reason I'm asking is I'm particularly concerned about emergency requirements if there was, for instance, a fire and people were needed to get out. The only access is via that staircase.
Can I just reassure you on that, Councillor? And the Section 182 guidance is very, very clear about this, that fire risk is a matter for the fire authority and it comes under separate regulations. And that the fire authority have obviously taken a close look at this and have dealt with it, and they're content with it. And that would appear in the fire risk assessment, which is endorsed by the fire authority. That's not something that committee needs to revisit.
They've said an overall capacity of 60. They haven't made any comments about the distribution of that 60.
No, but that's not for this committee to do. That comes under the fire risk assessment. And there are regulatory requirements for these licensees to submit particular risk assessments and capacities and where and exit, how many get through those other regulations.
So I would ask where in the risk assessment this is contained.
Well, it's within the fire risk assessment, which isn't necessarily in front of you. It comes under different regulations.
Okay.
Yeah, we don't have that.
Can I just say something?
Yes.
Anything to do with the fire is not regulated by the licensing. It is by the fire authority. So if the fire authority had been there and they said it's 60 people that you can have, that's all they can have in the building. If it's a building, it's 60, that's all they can have. They cannot have more than 60. And the licensing committee is not concerned with the fire regulations.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that. Members, either of you got any other questions before I pass over to the objectors?
I just have
sorry, yes.
I just have one question, if you don't mind.
Sorry, before you go, I apologise. I didn't identify Ms. Ferreira as our legal representative from the council, so just to make that aware.
I just have one question, and it's when we do it, this variation is not just to increase the capacity of people to 150, which 60 is inside and the rest outside, but is it for the because I can't see I can only see what's here. The variance is also to include the whole of the premises. That includes all the car park and everything. Do you know what I mean? It includes not only where the building is, but for the rest of the site.
It's the license variation is for the red line. I do have to emphasise we're also seeking the removal of the condition. That is important. We mustn't forget that bit.
I know that.
On the license for 40 at the minute. I didn't mention it, so I just wanted to reassure. But yeah, for the variation, the numbers, the activities, that goes within the red line, and then anything outside the red line would be off the premises. So you could potentially have off premises consumption, but in actual fact what you've got here is the table capacity for that anyway, so that's not very realistic, because then you're actually moving into the car park space.
Very much. So if I can move on to Ronan Manners from Essex Police.
Good morning, ma'am. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Good morning. Thank you very much indeed for your time this morning. I think that there's a bit of confusion because we're talking about the license variation and the 10s as well. And I'll try and sort of simplify it and deal with the variation in the first instance. Barrister is absolutely right. I was in contact with Hayley on the 23rd of April when the application first came in. And this is not sort of an intent of we've come back from the breach as was described. I like to engage with all applicants first off. Having reviewed the initial, their current license, I was looking at bits that I would like to add in an updated fashion, such as CCTV, wasn't particularly articulated. And we went through a number of conditions that I would think would be a good upgrade.
Dear. He's gone.
You have frozen, Mr. McManus.
I can hear and see you perfectly, Ma'am.
You are breaking up a bit.
Okay. Shall I continue?
You got up to the point. We heard you up to the point where you mentioned the CCTV.
Yes. So that initial contact with Hayley was about updating the license conditions, and then I go away and have a look at other issues that have been brought to attention or any other issues. For example, I'll contact the community policing team and see if there's any conditions that I'm unaware of or any issues at the premises. And realistically, we come back to this is a truck stop. It's a 5-acre site, and we have trucks moving in and out all week. And at the weekend, it's not as busy. So I understand the business are trying to sort of claw back sort of money and make the premises more profitable. However, having looked at the issue of last August, as mentioned, if this outside area was increased to permit 150 people, or increased to use the outside area as well, I am concerned that this would be a regular meeting for groups of 150 people. And if that is granted, well, they would be the premises would be quite right within their rights to hold events every weekend, up to and including the limits of the license. And I don't believe that the premises are in a position to sort of manage that every weekend. And there were some comments made about it's the same as a motorway service station, it's the same as a supermarket, and it's about people moving around. Well, the first point is that a motorway service station, the trucks and the people are at very separate parts of it. Secondly, we don't have people under the influence of alcohol wandering around late at night, sharing the same space as heavy goods vehicles and premises. And that's the same with the supermarket. So I think it was quite a simplistic task to say, well, people know what they're doing and they should look out for trucks, etc., etc. But unfortunately, it is my experience that people under the influence of alcohol don't necessarily always operate in a safe method. And I'm trying to make this as safe as area as possible. Now, in relation to the 10s, the premises have gone to great pains to describe how they're going to manage this event, banksmen, gates, etc., etc. But if we were to issue the license, if you're of a mind to issue the license, that safeguard would not be there every other time that they want to run an event, such as playing the football outside, which was discussed, and using the outside area for alcohol. So we would hold the 10 to the safety issues around the 10. Obviously, lots of safety issues sort of been put in place there, but they would not be available for the rest of the time of the license. So that's the license sort of variation. if I move on to the 10s, it is suggested that the incident as of last August.
Sorry, can I just interrupt you there? I'm looking for advice from officers, perhaps, but we, at this point in time, we are not discussing the 10s. Is it appropriate that this should be? I know that the solicitor for the applicants did bring in the 10s issues, but we will be looking at that in a lot more detail under the next item on the agenda. Can I just get advice from officers?
Yes, I think it is a separate item we're considering, Chairman.
Separate item. 10s is separate to the variation.
Okay. So if we look at back at last August, so still talking about the variation, it was suggested that there wasn't any drugs, there was no drugs usage seen or offered. That is not the case, and the allegation or the suggestion was that people were called there for illegal immigrants is simply not accurate. So if I say that incidents, police were called to an unlicensed music event on Sunday the 30th at 17:31.
Forgive me, Madam Chairman, I need to raise a legal point at this stage.
Go ahead.
Through you, Madam.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah. The officer is entitled to amplify, but what he's not entitled to do is raise new evidence. There are now 3 applications before this committee. There's been a previous 10, a variation, and a 10 after this one. In the middle of the submission is not the appropriate time to be introducing evidence that we've been asking for a very long time. I'm being ambushed. If there's specific evidence that the police are in possession of, it should have been disclosed and served a long time ago. I haven't seen it. This is not the time to introduce it.
Can I take advice from our legal officer?
If this is any new evidence, technically, it shouldn't be brought in front of the committee. It should be, if you wanted to introduce it at this late stage, you would have to give it to the Ms. Clover and the applicants as well as the objectors, and they will have to first, between them, agree that it can come in front of this committee. If anybody disagrees, then it can't come in front of the committee, and the committee should not be hearing it.
Chairman, can I suggest you look at page 30 of the agenda?
Yes.
And read the first couple of sentences there.
Right. So on page 30 of the agenda, it says on Sunday, the 30th of August, 2020 at 15, I presume that's 30 hours, police were called to an unlicensed music event at the location with 100 people in attendance. Officers discovered that people were dancing in the car park and there were signs of drug abuse. DPS presented police with public performance license, but I think you can read the rest of it for yourself. But from that, it appear that this is not introducing new evidence unless anybody is going to argue against that. Ms. Clover?
Yeah, as long as that's all it is, my concern was that we were going to start seeing CAD reports or something else. I've maintained that there's no evidence of the drug abuse. It hasn't been produced. It's never been evidenced. That's still the position. If that's the nature of the complaint as per the papers, my comments stand. If the officer is now looking to add to that, I object.
Okay. Mr. McManus, was that the extent of what you were going to give verbally just now?
Exactly it. And I was just literally reading the reports from the officer saying that they've been to an unlicensed music event and there was clear signs of drug abuse. I think we have to take the common sense approach that if a police officer says that he sees signs of drug abuse, then I'd have to accept that. I take on board Ms. Clover's point. I was presented this morning from, it's been on the internet, of video evidence, and I can show the clip, also put the clip through. However, I don't know whether the barrister or Haley and Mr. Thompson have had sight of it, but it is there, and it will give you a picture paints 1,000 words.
No, Chairman, this is exactly what I don't want.
Sorry,
That's
Ms.
what I don't want.
Clover, can I just first of all come in on that one? We have heard that this was a possible way that something that would come forward. If it is going to be shown, it has to be shown to the applicants and their representatives and the objectors before it is seen by the committee. If it is shown to those that grouping, then they would have to either agree or object to it being put forward. So on that basis, if Mr. McManus wishes to bring it forward as evidence, it would have to be shown to, as I say, the applicants' agents, the applicants themselves, and the objectors. On that basis, Mr. McManus, do you wish to go forward with this or to withdraw the suggestion that it should be shown?
Well, I am completely at.
Sorry, we've got.
Yeah, I'm completely at the discretion. If they want me, I will send it across to them, so it can be viewed at some point before the licensing committee see it. Or if not, the evidence is there, and I can only present what I've been presented with. There's an email chain. It was sent to me this morning. Well, sorry, it was sent to me last night, and I opened it this morning. I have not seen it before or since.
I'm looking again, perhaps, to our legal officer for a bit more advice on this.
If this is the evidence that the documentation that he has at this moment should have been submitted to the licensing committee, to the licensing officers long before this morning, so that it could be distributed to the applicants, the objectors, because they have to have a chance to look at this information first. It hasn't been done like that. So if he's now saying that this information he has is to back what he said there, then it should be given to Miss Clover and Mr. Grimsby and Haley and any of the objectors first, and let them have a look at it. And if they object to it going in, then it can't be presented to this committee. So Miss Clover, it's down to you.
Well, Madam Chair, I think I can short circuit this because there is no chance on God's green earth that I would be agreeing for this evidence to go in front of the committee at this stage.
Okay,
what would have to happen is we would have to have some long-winded adjournment off to another day and so on and so forth on a Regulation 18 basis. So I'm going to short circuit it and say, in the circumstances where the previous 10 came in March, went to hearing with the same allegation in it, and then the variation application, and then a further 10, and this evidence only pops up last night. Absolutely not. It's an outrageous thing to do. I take fundamental exception to it, and I would ask the committee to completely disregard it.
Thank you for those comments. And I think, looking at my fellow committee members, I think we are of the opinion that it should not be submitted. Yeah. Thank you very much. So, Mr. McManus, if we can go forward then just with your verbal
Fine.
continuation.
Yeah. That's really in relation to the variation that I would seek to present to you today. So I'm more than happy to field any questions that you might have. It's the information, as we said, has been on the internet, and I only became available. So I'm not trying to ambush anyone. I'm trying to literally present all the information.
Oh, really?
I think perhaps this is the point, perhaps, where we stop unless you have got anything else to ask.
Can I just ask a question? And it's simple. The fire authority is going to allow 60 people in the building, correct? So it's no, my maths is going to let me down, but and that will be part of the 150 people that you're asking for. That's what I wanted to ask. My maths would let me down at this page. I'm sorry.
Okay. In that case, Councillor Lyon or Councillor Stalker, any questions of Mr. McManus?
I've got a question
Councillor Stalker.
for him. A couple of observations. Mr. McManus characterised the applicant's barrister as saying that there was no drugs. She didn't say there was no drugs. She said he'd not produced any evidence of any drugs, and you still haven't. And also, when you reverted to the evidence that has been shown to us and to the applicants, the word clear was added by you to the signs of drug abuse. Doesn't say anything about clear in the document that I'm reading. So can we stick to the evidence as it's being presented, please, and not to go off piste?
Thank you for those comments, Councillor Stalker. Any questions, Councillor Lyon?
Not at this stage at all.
Thank you. And I don't think I've got any questions on this at this point either. If I can go to the applicant's agent, have you any questions of Mr. McManus?
No, Madam Chair, I won't ask any questions. I'll just make some submissions at the end if I may. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Holmes? Sorry, you're on mute.
Thank you, Chairman. Sorry about that. Yes, as a town council, we have discussed this a lot. We're having problems in Waltham Abbey with, like the officer said, there is drug abuse. The Marriott Hotel has had problems, and they.
Sorry, Councillor Holmes, have you got a question that you wish to ask of Mr. McManus?
Yes. He's saying he's keeping his safety, which I wanted to know his safety. I've gone past there many a time. Lorries are parked all outside because they've barricaded their car park. They can't get in. There's lorries parked underneath the M25 on the path where people that walk to the pub round the corner can't walk along. So I want to see how safety he has got it in his hands. I'd like to know.
Right, Mr. McManus.
Hold on. Is
Sorry,
it to Mr.
yes,
McManus you're asking the question, or to Haley and Nicholas or Sarah, or the representative Sarah Clover? Because you've talked about lorries parked outside and safety. So that can only be, it can't be to Mr. McManus, because public safety relates to the premises, the actual premises, and not necessarily what's happening outside. It has to be the premises. Public safety is related to the premises.
Okay, all right. I'm on the premises then. Once the lorries are all parked and you've blocked off, you're full up. So if you've got cars coming in the...
Sorry, Mr. McManus. Sorry, Councillor Holmes. At this point in time, you are able to ask a question or questions of Mr. McManus in his role as the police licensing officer.
Right. Okay, I'll ask the question then. When the car park is shut, how do you check on vehicles coming in and out and the safety?
I don't think.
Excuse me.
I don't think this is a question of Mr. McManus. Yeah,
No.
Rosie.
Councillor Holmes, the only questions you can ask is to whatever Mr. McManus raised and said. What the questions you are asking now is actually should have been directed to Miss Clover or Miss Hanson when you had a chance to raise those questions.
Okay.
Because you're talking about.
I have no question then at the moment.
Okay, thank you. Any other officers got any questions as well? No, I don't think so. In that case, if I can now move on to Councillor Holmes for your reasons presentation of the objections as those coming from the Town Council.
Thank you, Chairman. Right, it's to do with the Town Council. We were worried on the premises with the crime and prevention. Waltham Abbey does have a problem with this, and the Marriott Hotel has a similar problem. As it's got a big car park, people do wander around there, and we're just worried that it's going to escalate. As a town council, we feel our right to help and keep Waltham Abbey safe. There's loads of residents that when that goes on all round there, and we get phone calls and asking what is the town council doing about the the corruption that's going on. We do coordinate with the police. The police do check all round, and I know they have visited the diner, and but they've never actually caught anyone in there at the time when they do check. And it's also a public safety. We're concerned on the amount of lorries that come in and out of there. They do block the road on the left side when the traffic's trying to join the M25. We're concerned on that. There's a bus stop there where people get off and workmen go to the Marriott Hotel staff. And there's a coach stop as well that sort of the traffic is caused congestion because they've had to park next to a lorry. So we did bring this up when the diner first started, and it seems to be escalated now, and it's getting worse. And the other one is causing a public nuisance. We have got people that do walk along that road, and they do go round the corner up to they're doing a lot more walking. And I feel that as a town council, we're trying to bring everything in for everyone to keep safe and, it completely clear. But as far as I'm concerned, the traffic outside there is horrendous. And I think a lot of people should go at between 5 and 7 o'clock at night, and you can see why we was objecting about the lorry park altogether. Thank you.
Can I just remind the councillors and this is that this matter has to be this application has been to be treated on its own merit, and you have to look at the information and documents and everything that was said here, but you also have to have the evidence to back up if somebody raises an instance about public nuisance, about crime and prevention. It all has to relate to this premises, and you have to have the evidence to show this is what happened at this premises. That's all.
Thank you for that. If I can go to the applicants, have you got any questions of Councillor Holmes?
No, thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. And any officers got any questions or anything to add on that? Right, thank you very much for that. We now come to the opportunity, if the objector wishes to make any final statement but not bringing any new information in. Councillor Holmes, have you got anything as a final statement?
No.
Right, thank you. And the applicant's agent barrister, have you got any final statement you would like to make, again without bringing any new issues into the statement?
Yeah, Madam Chair, if I may just take a couple of minutes, and I will keep it brief, but I just want to respond to a couple of the points raised by the objectors as my final comments. The police officer, Mr. McManus, is saying that this is a truck stop, as if that's fixed in stone and that's all it can be. Well, that's a bit like saying, well, Glastonbury is a farm and it mustn't be anything else. Things develop and evolve, and as long as it's done properly, as long as it's done safely and appropriately, there is no reason to refuse that. And particularly in these post-COVID times, we're looking at business recovery. The government sent out, the different departments have sent out all sorts of correspondence to local authorities. You will have received some as the licensing committee about assisting businesses to recover post-COVID. And that's a local economy issue. It's an employment issue. It's of benefit to the people who use the diner and also to the people who work there, whose livings depend upon it. So it's not just a truck stop. These are responsible people who've gone to great lengths. They've spent a lot of money on professional representation, not only in hearings of this sort, but also to get their event plan right. to get their risk assessments right. They don't do it themselves. They outsource it to professionals who really know what they're doing. And I hope that you can see that reflected in the documentation that you've been given. I haven't sought to go through it all with you line by line, because you're more than capable of reading it and following it and understanding it for yourselves. But I hope the quality of it and the professional quality of it comes shining through. And PC McManus said, well, it's all very well having restrictions on the TENS like HGV movements and so forth, but that won't apply all the time to the variation. Well, why not? Of course it would. If there are measures, safety measures that are taken and that are applied, that are necessary, that work, it's not lip service, it's not window dressing. Those are the measures that would be taken every time they were necessary. And so, of course, the same event plans would be used. Of course, the same risk assessments would be used. Of course, the same professionals would be advising. You've seen the statement from the site manager, who is there, Billy, who is there precisely for the purpose of implementing these measures. So, of course, it's not a one-off. PC McManus said these licensees would not be in a position to manage events every weekend. That's a strange thing to say. Firstly, there's no intention of having them every weekend. This is the flexibility to have events as and when. Secondly, why would they not be in a position to manage them? If they manage them effectively once, as we know they have, the August 2020 event, whatever you say about it, was not the only one. There have been others that have not come to attention. They've not caused any issues or problems at all. If they can do it once, they can do it twice, they can do it 10 times, they can do it 100 times. And I'm going to emphasize in a moment your capacity and facility to review licenses. Let's wrap this all up together. The only two concerns that made it through the net, the filter for the temporary event notice last time, because all of these points were made then as well, that the drugs were raised, August 2020 was raised. I think there was some issue about hazardous chemicals. I've used the word catastrophizing. The only two concerns that made it through the committee's scrutiny net were the conflict between pedestrians and vehicles and wandering out onto the roads. Those were the only two things left that might have caused a concern. PC McManus said, well, at motorway services, it's different because trucks and people are kept separate. Well, no, they're not, because it's identical that wherever the trucks are parked on motorway service stations, the drivers have to get out of them and make their way into the motorway service station. It's absolutely identical. I don't understand. With the added challenge, I suppose, of truckers going past the cars in the car park to get into the motorway service stations. There's no realistic differentiation to be drawn there at all. People drinking alcohol, bringing alcohol into the mix. Well, don't forget, a lot of motorway service stations, again, are identical. They will have a hotel on site, and people do exactly the same thing. They park up, they go into the hotel, they eat food, they drink alcohol, they sleep the night, they get up and they go about their daily business. We're not necessarily getting roaring drunk and wandering across the car park and out onto the motorway. The level of risk, this is what you're looking at, risk. The level of risk and what it takes to contain and control it. And it's appropriate to look at analogous situations to see if that ever gives rise to problem, and it doesn't. People are perfectly used to these situations. These are professional drivers. They'd lose their license if they were found behaving in a drunken fashion in, on, or around their lorry. They would lose their job, no doubt, if they got into trouble like that. They're very well aware of it. So these are unrealistic, overblown concerns that are not actually realistic. Of course, the licensing regime is all about reasonableness and proportionality. It's not belt and braces. It's what's necessary, what's appropriate. That's the word, what's appropriate to control the level of risk that the evidence demonstrated to you actually presents. There is a difference as well, bear this in mind, between the day-to-day operation of the diner, where people are coming in, refreshing themselves, going out again, and a weekend event. they behave differently, they're catered for differently in terms of event planning, event management. So the diners, the truck drivers going in to have some food, take a rest and so forth during a weekday is a different concept from having a one-off or an individual event, which then has the banksman and the traffic marshals and the security staff, 10 security staff, 49 other staff, that kind of thing. They're managed differently because they're different animals and they behave in a different way. I'm just going to say this about the drugs, because it is an outrageous approach for the police. You can tell how important this is to the police, really, by what they've done about it, which is nothing. And not even nothing in the general sense of following it up as an allegation, but nothing in terms of bringing evidence forward to you. They've had weeks to do this now, if it were of concern, and it was obviously an afterthought also ran, that somebody thought to send an email of videos from where to whom, who knows, last night. Well, that in and of itself is indicative as to how significant this was, because if somebody had looked at those videos and gone, oh my God, that would have been in front of you like a flash, and it wasn't. So I draw that to your attention. This particular officer, PC McManus, doesn't even appear to know what the nature of the allegation is. So in terms of evidence upon which you could rest any particular licensing step, I would invite you to decline to do so. Coming back to my key point, probably my last point, which is you've always got review. If any of this causes a problem, if the numbers are a problem, if the event management is a problem, if there are drug issues, if there is misbehaviour, anybody, including the town council and the police, local residents, anybody else, can refer this back to you overnight on a review and say, this isn't working. We've got a problem here. And this is the nature of the problem. This is precisely what is going wrong. Then you've got the evidence. Then you can take the forensic approach that you'd need to take, either to stop the problem or curtail the licence in its entirety. That is your power. That is your gift. And that is the way the Licensing Act works. It is a permissive deregulatory regime that says yes, unless it needs to say no. And on this occasion, there is no need to say no. So I do invite the committee to have that confidence to resolve this, to allow these competent professional business people to do what they're asking you to do, and then you can watch and see how they get on. And I don't think you'll have any issues with it at all. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Before we go into a private session, I've got a couple of questions which I would have been, if we go into private session, would have been raised, and I would be then coming back to ask those questions. Okay, if I could just ask you to bear with me and just ask these couple of questions. Firstly, it is becoming apparent from the discussion that this is looking to be holding events. Will these events involve the attendees dancing? And also, as part of the TENS, which I'm trying to keep this separate, but as part of the TENS, it talks about all HGV movements being stopped at that event on the 26th of June. Does that infer that every time there is an event on this site, every HGV movement will be stopped?
I'm going to turn in a moment to Nick and Hayley to answer that in detail, particularly on the dancing point. But I want to emphasise this is not necessarily intended to be every weekend. This is
I accept that. Yeah.
In relation to the removal of HGV stopping the movement, it seems sensible to say that would pertain every time it was required to do so. So they'll watch this event, see how it goes in June. If that's the thing that's required to make it safe, that the trucks do very little movement on a weekend anyway. So it would be built into the events plan. It's a living document. It will get upgraded and updated. If something's working, continue to do that. If it's not working, do something different. So if that's a safety measure that's required, that helps, that works, there's no reason why it couldn't continue. But I am just going to ask Hayley and Nick to come in there so that they say it to you rather than me saying it to you, if that's possible. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Hello. Good afternoon. Can you all hear me?
Yep.
Yeah. Truck drivers don't dance, and they go to bed at between 9 and 10 every night, and
Sorry,
they work Monday to
sorry, there was no indication that there was going to be truck drivers dancing. It was when you were holding an event for up to 150 people, would there be dancing?
Okay, right. So we need a capacity of 150 for the truck drivers only from Monday to Thursday, because that is the size of the site now. That is where it's expanded to over time. So the 150 people is for our regular business Monday to Thursday. If we was to hold an event, it would be a temporary event as specified in our application to you, and it will be managed accordingly, completely separate, and there wouldn't be any trucks coming in and out if there was non-truck drivers on site. So our variation is very, very clear. It is for our trucking business Monday to Thursday. We need to increase the capacity. We need the additional outside space due to COVID, and we have that volume of business. Simple as that. The two are completely. The two are separated.
Thank you for that clarification, because throughout this discussion this morning, we have at no point been given to understand that these numbers were to accommodate the numbers of truck drivers that are coming onto site on a regular basis.
Sorry, Madam Chair, that's my fault, and I think I've probably preempted the objection that the officer was making, which was that once you've granted the variation, there's nothing within it that would prevent an event from taking place with the reduced numbers, which is true, but I haven't sufficiently emphasised, and that's my fault, what Mr. Thompson has just told you, which is that the purpose of the variation 7 days a week or whenever it's required for is to service the diner itself for the truckers. And so the additional numbers, and of course for the 10 we're talking about, is up to 450, 499, I think. That would be a 10 over and above, because obviously the 150 isn't enough.
Thank you. Councillor Lyon, you wanted to...
Chairman, I have to say I'm getting very confused between evidence that's been produced for the 10s and evidence that's been produced here. Just reading through the application, it only says supply of alcohol, as far as I can tell. I'm not seeing anything. I'm looking at page 18 of the bundle. There's nothing else ticked other than supply of alcohol. And it says Monday to Sunday from 12 to 2300. And then it talks about opening hours 6 to 23. So we're only talking about supply of alcohol to the truckers. It doesn't say anything about weekends in this particular application. The other thing that I wanted to clarify was, again, it's the two applications. There's a risk assessment that has been produced for the 10s, which is quite generic, but I'm not sure how a risk assessment would apply to this particular variation. And I haven't seen anything in there about a challenge 25 or being able to manage the sale of alcohol to underage people. So just those sorts of questions. Am I right in saying it's only for alcohol and it's 7 days a week? And I think your point about the trucks was something that I was going to raise. Will the trucks still be coming and going as normal under this particular application?
Sorry, could I just to highlight for one, first of all, on page 22 of the application of the papers we've got, it talks about protection of children from harm, and it does say there that evidence will need to be, a photographic ID would need to be proof of age, so that is within the documents.
Madam Chairman, through you, just to clarify, this is a variation of an existing licence. So the existing licence remains and all the conditions on it. So if there is already a condition on the existing licence that would pertain, that remains exactly as is. It's not a freestanding application in front of you. So any of the activities or any of the conditions would go forward, and the nub of this application is numbers. So it's removing essentially that condition that only 40 people can be there, and it's introducing a new cap essentially of 150 and the ancillary things that go with it. And I appreciate it is difficult to variation and the 10, the conditions on the premises license day to day in terms of the operating schedule are the conditions that control the license as far as the committee is concerned. If there's additional risk assessment or management that's required, that's done in-house. So there are policies, there are not search policies, I don't mean search policies, I mean there are things like drugs policies and so forth that apply. There's also staff training. The site manager, Billy, has his certain protocols and so forth. They don't need building into the license necessarily, because if they're being done, they're being done. As far as the events are concerned, and this again is my fault that I haven't differentiated sufficiently. They are single standalone events that have an event management plan and a risk assessment that go with them particularly, and you effectively would get to look at them every time if they're coming forward on the back of a temporary event notice.
Thank you for that. Councillor Lyon?
Yeah, just come back. I mean, my concern here is the additional risk associated with additional numbers. So we're going up from 40 to 150. Are there any additional risks that need to be mitigated? And how are those risks being managed? And I don't see anything that suggests that has been taken account of.
Well, let's flip that back, because the risks are the ones that have been presented to you by the objectors, because the police in particular are the ones who have gone through this and have highlighted anything that they might identify as a risk. And that's been put before you, and it boils down essentially to traffic conflict. So far as the normal operation of a license is concerned, things like public safety within the building, which your learned legal advisor has already made reference to. Is there something that might go wrong and happen within the body of the building, which is the objective of prevention of protection of public safety? There is nothing. Protection of children, well, there will be no children as per the operating schedule in the application. We don't have children on site, and there are checks for underage drinking. Challenge 21 is already on the licence. What's the risk of nuisance, public nuisance? Well, that hasn't been raised. That's usually things like noise, isn't it? And smoke and odours. There's nothing of that sort going on. So it boils back down to crime and disorder, and then it is legitimate to look at safety in the context of pedestrian and vehicle movements, and we've dealt with that quite exhaustively. So far as the committee is concerned, and their understandable anxiety about have these risks been taken care of, you've heard that canvass very thoroughly in front of you today, and your duty is based upon evidence. Do you need that enshrined in a document that's written down? Well, no, you don't, because the risks that have been identified have been put into their context, and you've been told how they will be taken care of. If that doesn't transpire, then there is the facility of review. You don't have to micromanage licenses and say, well, for every single step that a competent site manager takes, it has to be written down in a book somewhere. Licenses like this operate up and down the country the whole time. Competent pub operators, competent event operators, competent truck diner operators know what they're doing, and that's the whole point.
Thank you for those comments. Yes, Ferrari.
On page 24 of the original license, it does have the conditions that go with it, which is and it has under the headings of prevention of crime and disorder, public safety. There's nothing for public nuisance, and they have protection of children from harm. And under there is where you see challenge 21. Public safety is where you have the 40 people, which was given by the magistrates court, and that's the one they want to now increase to 150. That's my understanding, where 60 is the only amount that would be allowed inside the building in accordance with the fire regulations, and the rest is for the outside where they'll put the tables. So I just want, because everybody's concerned about the truck stops and whatnot, people coming in, and the applicants did say that this 150 was really for between Monday and Thursday. Is that correct? But I assume you really want 150 for the whole week, really, rather than just. So I just wondering if would you, under public safety, and I'm just throwing it out there, would the applicants given with Sarah Miss Clover, if the councils were, I'm not, I don't make the decisions, but if they were minded, would you like to say could we say something like, no heavy good vehicles shall be permitted to enter or leave the premises at the same time if and when events are held under the premises license? So when you have the 150 people, something to that effect?
That would be a complicated condition to come up with off
Okay.
the top
Okay.
of my head.
Sorry, I was just trying to.
Understand. Yeah, the preponderance of the operation of the premises license, the variation that we're looking at, is to facilitate truck drivers.
Is to truck.
Yeah, it is. I may have raised more of a problem than I was solving, in actual fact, because I was trying to deal with the police officer's assertion that there would be nothing to stop an event taking place under the variation for up to 150 people, which technically is true, but that isn't the intention. Now, I'm going to flip it back again and say, if there becomes a problem with the variation,
then you could review it.
Seeing events, then you review it. Take it away then.
No,
yeah.
I just think I was trying, because the variation is getting mixed up with a 10 in a little way.
And I haven't helped.
And I'm just trying to see the best way forward, in that we didn't realize that the 150 was just for the drivers, the truck drivers. And so you could understand the element that's saying, okay, if it's 16 side and the rest outside, could the whole, once you grant 150, would you just have it for you could hold a small event, you see what I mean?
I do.
And I think if somebody had a small event at that spot, the same thing about conflict between drivers, truck drivers, and people attending it who are not truck drivers could come into a conflict. So I was just wondering whether it's something that
it's a fair comment, but there's 2 points to make in response. The first is, of course, the 150 is in a much more limited, curtailed space.
Okay. Oh, it's in a curtailed space. Okay.
That's the red line, isn't it?
Okay. All right.
So you'd only be able to have your activity within the red line. And that's any licensable activity. Anything else is sort of out of bounds, which would be different from a main event. And the second point to make, again, which I'm reiterating, is that these are competent professional people. If they want to do something, they've already got the external safety experts, they've already got the consultants, they've already got the site manager, they've already got the event planner, Stephen Brown, who's produced their event plans for them. If they should decide to do anything like that, it's inevitable that they would take the requisite steps to make sure it's safe. The last thing they want is for somebody to get hurt on their premises. I mean, that's disastrous, absolutely disastrous. This idea that if somebody doesn't condition it to death, they might let it happen is the wrong way of looking at it. Safety, you can imagine, for a truck stop, there's all sorts of different things that might go wrong with a truck stop. The safety is absolutely paramount at all times, and nothing about that would change.
I think the problems arise when you're trying to do the variation and then introduce about the 10s, and that has caused the problem.
It's my fault.
All right.
Can I ask one final question? If we were to be recommending coming forward with this variation for approval, one of the things that we've got here is the numbers. Would the applicants be content if, in view of the fact that the fire service have reduced their internal maximum number from 80 to 60, that the external number, the total number, would then also be reduced from 150 to 130?
I haven't followed that, Madam Chairman. I'm so sorry. Would you just run that past me again, please?
As the original intention was that there would be 150 in total, with a maximum of a maximum being allowed to be inside of 80. That has been reduced to 60 maximum inside by the fire services assessments, reducing that number by 20. Would the applicants be content if we, under discussion, were to come forward with a total of 130 as opposed to 150, with 60 inside and 70 outside?
Okay, I follow. Sorry. I'm going to say no because there's no reason for it. And for all of these decisions, there would have to be a reason set out within your reasons as to why and what difference it would make. And simply cutting numbers for balance or for the sake of it, or because it used to be this and now it's that, would not be a good reason. And empirically, and based on the evidence that you've got, that there's no objection to 150 per se. The concerns that have been raised are generic safety concerns that might apply if you had 10 people there.
And there is sufficient space on the outlined red external for that extra 20.
Yes, indeed. Absolutely. And bear in mind, obviously, these are maxima anyway.
Oh, yes. No, I realise that. Councillor Lyon.
Yeah, I've just counted up the number of tables that are actually shown. I'm not sure whether they're COVID specific, and I'm not sure how long that's going to last, but it's 8 tables, which gives you, if you say 10 people per table, it's 80 people. So you're going to need another 2 tables, aren't you, to actually accommodate 100 or 1 table. But again, is there enough space? It's not shown on that plan, but is there adequate space to provide additional spacing on the veranda with COVID spacing at this time?
Quite possibly, but I think we have to keep going back to what's the reason for the committee to reduce numbers if it comes to the point and the licensees can't put in another table, there isn't the space. They have to comply with COVID regulations for so long as those regulations apply, which won't be beyond June, we hope. But they're going to be restricted by their red line. If they can't put in another table and they can't actually accommodate those numbers, that's tough luck for them, because that's what the license would curtail. But so far as the committee is concerned, trying to micromanage the numbers now, I would say for why?
Thank you for that, Diane. It's a question that we ask quite often on applications like this when numbers come in. So it's, I just wanted to ask it of the applicants before we went into private session. So if we have no more comments or questions, I would then ask that our Democratic Services Officer removes into the waiting room those who are not eligible to be part of our discussion.
Okay.
And we will come back to you having considered this matter as and when we have reached this.
Madam Chair, may I just ask from a practical point of view how we will know when we are to come back into the meeting if we leave now?
I go to our officers for that one because obviously that's one of their roles in this circumstance.
What we normally do is just put you in the waiting room where you can't see or hear anything, and we'll call you all back or let you all back into the meeting once we're ready to give the decision. So I can't tell you how long that's going to take, I'm afraid. Could be 5 minutes, could be half an hour or more. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
You very much.
And pause webcast as well, please.
I think we have most people back. I'm conscious that we don't appear to have the applicants. We do now.
Joining.
Yeah. Right. Thank you for your forbearance. We have had a discussion around this application, focusing on the fact that we are looking at this point in time at the variation of the licence. So I will read out the decision sheet, which I have before me, which I have to do. So bear with me while I read that out. We are looking at the premises of J26 Diner, Skillet Hill Farm, Honey Lane, Waltham Abbey, Essex, EN9 3QU. We consider that the application satisfies the necessary requirements in order to be considered, as it is on the prescribed form. It has been advertised and relevant notifications given. We have taken into account the relevant written and oral representations, the 4 licensing objectives, and the Council's licensing policy and the Secretary of State's guidance. During our deliberations in private session, our advisory officers gave us no further advice. The decision of this subcommittee is that the application to vary the premises license in respect of J26 Diner, Skillet Hill Farm, Honey Lane, Waltham Abbey, Essex, EN9 3QU, be granted subject to the following conditions, which, in the opinion of the subcommittee, are reasonable, proportionate, and in the public interest for the promotion of the licensing objectives. Subject to the existing conditions on the license, with a variation to the number of people from 40 to 150, together with the additional steps to support the 4 licensing objectives as set out in section M on page 21 of the agenda. And this application, applicants are reminded of their right to appeal to the Magistrates' Court within 21 days of the written notification of the decision, which will be signed by myself as chairman. And I would just add that has been mentioned several times within the discussions, the license is open to review by those who feel that they might have sufficient or any evidence that they wish to bring that forward. But as with all licensing applications, all licenses, they are all open to review, applications for review. So thank you all very much for this part of the meeting. We are very conscious of time and the fact that we have had quite a long session. So I know that those who've been put in the waiting room have had a break. Those of us taking part in the actual decisions have not had any break at all. So I'm going to ask that you agree that we have a short adjournment to reconvene at 1 p.m. If everybody is agreeable with that, then we will reconvene at 1 p.m. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
I could hear better.
Right. As far as I can see from my screen, I think we have everyone back who I would expect to see back. So thank you for allowing us to have that slight break. It just means that we're slightly refreshed, as I say, those who were involved in the discussion session as well as actually the actual meeting. So we now move on to item 6 on the agenda, which is the temporary events notice, the TENS for Junction 26 Diner at Skillet Hill Farm. And if I can first of all pass over to Denise Bastick to outline the application.
Thank you, Chair. An application has been made by Mr. Nicholas Thompson for a new temporary event notice for a music event outside to include live music, food and drink on Saturday the 26th of June 2021, the Junction 26 Diner, Skillet Hill Farm, Honey Lane, Waltham Abbey, EN9 3QU. The application is for the sale by retail of alcohol and provision of regulated entertainment. The application was received on the 28th of April 2021. A temporary event notice for this event was previously submitted on the 31st of March 2021 and was refused at the hearing held on 14th of April 2021. It is noted that all applications are considered on their own merits. The responsible authorities for the police, the environment and neighbourhood team and public health unit were consulted. The authority has received a representation from Essex Police, a copy of which is in the supplement bundle. Also, just to be noted, the applicant also submitted traffic banksman certificates for Sonny Spiller and Billy Cole, together with their ID cards. These have not been included in the public agenda due to the personal information contained in them. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much for that. So the procedure is as before. I will invite the applicant's representative to present the case for this TENS application, and then we will have the questions before, and then the opportunity as before, and the opportunity for Mr. McManus to present the objection that he has put forward. So I can hand over to the applicant's representative. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'm very conscious that this is officially a separate hearing. However, I'm also conscious that I've been through a lot of the relevant material already. Now I'm in your hands as to how much of that I repeat. I'm conscious there may be people in this meeting that were not in the previous meeting, members of the public and so forth, but I'm very anxious not to repeat myself.
Yeah, I just looking at those who are present at the meeting, there are no, sorry, we seem to have an added person at the meeting. That we have nobody else joined the meeting who was not in the previous meeting. It could well be that through webcast there are other people watching, but the actual makeup of the meeting is as before. So if there are areas that you feel you can leave out, then yes, please do.
I'm going to approach it on that basis, Madam Chairman. That's very helpful. Thank you.
Sorry,
yes, I just want you to note that Councillor Richard Morgan is not one of the councillors who is going to make the decision. He's just sitting in as an observer. Thank you.
Yeah, it is the same panel as before. Thank you.
That's fine. And Madam Chairman, that's very helpful, because obviously you've now had an opportunity to consider a risk. And that is really what we are here all about. And I'm sure you are clear by now that this is a re-presentation of the temporary event notice that was submitted in March and was refused, and it is heading for appeal. And so essentially this would take care of that entire situation, but this is a bespoke decision in front of you, as we've repeatedly said, to be decided on its merits. But you have already gone through all the relevant issues that would pertain. So having looked at the variation, having looked at the site, having looked at the particular issues surrounding movement of vehicles, HGVs, conflict with pedestrians and so forth, you now have it fully in your minds as to what activity on this site involves and would look like. And you heard from Mr. Thompson, Nick Thompson, a little bit earlier about the differentiation in the minds of the applicants between the day-to-day operation of the diner for up to 150 and the facility offered to truckers for their refreshment, their overnight stops, and much less relevance to events and those sorts of regulated entertainment activities. And these types of temporary events, which are very much focused on an event, a bespoke activity of some description, which lasts as long as it lasts, and then it's finished, and the next time you would see it would be under the auspices of another temporary event notice. And that's the way in which the licensees want to approach matters. And so the event plans that go with the events look very different. And the police concerns remain consistent throughout. So you've had those essentially canvassed before you already. We've looked at the August 2020 event. I'm not going to go all the way through that again. You've heard what both sides have got to say about that. But what I would emphasise is, and I did say it previously, that the only two concerns that made it through the net last time and that are going to be in front of the appeal court are the conflict between HGVs and pedestrians and people wandering onto the road. Now, the conflict between HGVs and pedestrians is completely taken care of. I mean, absolutely comprehensively taken care of by grounding the HGVs. You cannot reduce the risk more than that. And so for the entirety of the event and a safety margin beforehand and a safety margin afterwards, HGV movements will simply not be permitted. It is as simple as that. So there is no possibility of dangerous conflict between an HGV movement and a pedestrian. The only other vehicular and pedestrian movements, as we've discussed previously, would be in relation to cars, taxis, and pedestrians. And the event management takes absolute notice of that. It is fully aware of that. And so it has pathways for movement and marshalling and signage and people being shepherded in the correct directions and prevented from going in the wrong directions. You've been to these sorts of things. You know how it works. You have parking marshals waving you to park in a particular spot and to follow a particular track. So you haven't got cars weaving all over the place and going wherever they want to. And it works well. It works for festivals. It works for National Trust places. I'm sure you've come across it in the past, and that's the way it's done. And it's very effective, and that's how it would be here as well. In actual fact, that there's very limited expectation of pedestrian visitors coming onto the site that are not in a vehicle of some description. It's that the venue doesn't lend itself to that. People walking there. So the significant majority would be coming in their own car or would be using a taxi. And the local taxi firms are aware. There's a particular firm that the licensees work with to make sure that they are all in tune with the event management plan and operating in accordance with it and dropping off at the correct point and so forth. The reason, I did say I was going to tell you the reason why there is a second submission of the same temporary event notice effectively. The first one, there's no magic in it. The first one was in the name of Mrs. Rogerson. This one's in the name of Mr. Thompson. There's nothing in that particularly. But there was no facility for music. That there's some issue as to the deregulation of music and where it can take place in accordance with the deregulation under the Live Music Act and the deregulation regulations of 2014. So that it's a niggle, a nuance that's being taken care of with this fresh application. It's just got that extra parameter within it. But of course, it is an opportunity to look again at this situation and look again at the police evidence about it, the police concerns about it. And now, of course, in light of the decision you've just reached about the variation and the way that you've approached risk in terms of the variation, you are now in a very strong position to revisit the 10 and to see whether that is going to be a problem or not. And obviously, we want to get this resolved as quickly as possible, although we do now have a date as of yesterday or the day before. I think we do actually now have a magistrate's date that is prior to the 26th of June, so it can be resolved, but it's not particularly in anybody's interests to do it in that way. So that's why you've got another bite of the cherry, as it were, from the applicant's point of view at this temporary event, to iron out those wrinkles and also just to see where we are at this particular point. And the only that I've dealt with the first objection, then the conflict between pedestrians and vehicles. The second is this notion of people wandering, potentially drunk, out onto roads. And I simply raise what I raised before, which is that this is not a novel situation. This is not unique by any standards. And if you contextualize it with other similar situations, and I've used the analogy of motorway service stations where people do stay after a meal or overnight, you've got pubs at motorway service stations, you've got hotels that do food and drink at motorway service stations, and the incidence of people wandering out of their accommodation and wandering onto the motorway, well, it would make the national news, wouldn't it? You'd hear about it. It's a very extreme idea. It's a very extreme notion. And again, we approach licensing on the basis of it's going to be all right unless there's evidence to demonstrate that it's not for some reason. And this again is going so far down the end of the scale of just in case, belt and braces, covering all the options, that it actually comes outside of the proper parameters of licensing, which is proportionality. And there's all sorts of case law on it. I'm not going to go into all of that, but balancing the level of risk, the real nature of the risk, what could go wrong here, with the level of intervention. And that's how regulatory regimes work in all circumstances. Anything that you can think of, you balance how likely it is for the thing to happen with how draconian you want to be with the restrictions you're going to put on it. And what we've got here is a complete mismatch in my submission to you of the very, very unlikely incident of somebody in a drunken state wandering onto the road, wandering onto the motorway, versus the most draconian outcome, which is that you can't do the event at all for anybody, for any of these people, and that's not balanced. That is a mismatch. It's not as though it's the first time that events have been held here. There is a track record against which to measure these things. And also with other similar events in other similar localities. It's the kind of thing that we'd come across if it happened, if it were a real risk. But the reality is that people arrive, they park in the car parks, they're marshalled and shepherded towards the entertainment that they've come for. That's what they came for. That's what they want to do. They absorb the event, they take their refreshment. It's not a common thing for people to become roaring drunk because they've got to get themselves back home again. They're just normal people coming out for a normal good time, as we might all do on our weekends, bank holidays, other holidays. People are not out to abuse it. That's not the nature of the event that we're talking about. And so that's it, really. Again, I'm not going to walk you line by line through the event management plans. You do have an updated one for this submission of a 10 as opposed to what it was last time. Some of the points have been taken on board and crystallised within that event management plan. There's been some upgrading of the fencing, for example. The professional consultant, Steve Brown, the health and safety consultant who's put together the event management plan, recommended some steel fencing in the place of, I think it was previously wooden panels. The steel being capable of blocking off lines of sight between the event and roads. So just making that extra differentiation. Sorry, I've said Steve Brown, it's actually Steve Jones, forgive me. And also that you have appreciated, presumably from the plan and from the event management plan, that there are 2 layers of fencing. So there's the perimeter fencing and there's also internal fencing, again, to block people's movement and passage, to make sure that they are fenced in, literally. And the steel fencing provides additional wind breaking as well. So that's another factor for it. So the whole thing has just been gone over one more time to make sure that every step that can be taken has been taken and is implemented. You've got all the safety features there. If there's an emergency, if people need to be evacuated, if people need to be taken for emergency first aid, access for emergency vehicles, all of those things are fully built in. I think we were talking in the variation about, well, where is the risk assessment? How can we go through it line by line and see that everything's been catered for? That there's no question about it on this occasion. You can see it page after page of the considerations that have been gone through. And as I say, that's externally, professionally prepared at notable cost. It has to be said that this is not a situation where expense has been spared to get this right. It's worked previously. The experts doing these event management plans implement these measures at other events. That's how they know that they work, and where something needs tweaking, they can tweak it and update it. So I'm commending this submission to you. I'm asking you to focus upon the particular concerns that ruled the 10 out last time, to see if in fact those have been satisfactorily catered for. And to invite you this time around to allow this event on the 26th of June, it's a single event, to go ahead. And unless I can help you, and again, obviously those that are with me, I'll leave it there for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that.
Chair.
Sorry.
Chair. I just want to say something.
I've
if
also
I may.
got our own legal officer wishing to
Okay.
come in.
I
So
don't
if I
want
can
to
go to her, yeah, if I can go to her first, just in case it's picking up something.
I'm just going to say that the appeal hearing is the 2nd of June. And can you clarify, please, just to about the lorry movements? They're going to be like just the lorry movements. I think you say it's going to 2 hours. Is it 2 hours they shut before and 2 hours after? I just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah, I'm very conscious Mr. Grimsey wants to say something, which
Okay.
may well be an indication that I've got something wrong, which, you know, I do.
Okay.
But yeah, the HGV movements 2 hours before the event and 2 hours afterwards. So no HGV movements from midday until 0100 the following day at the earliest.
Thank you for that. Mr. Grimsey.
Quite the opposite, I'm afraid. You may have seen Sarah correct herself on Mr. Brown's name to Mr. Jones. That was as a result of me frantically texting her to say it was Steve Jones. And of course, I've looked at his report and it is Steve Brown, so I may as well sort of retire. I apologise to everybody. That was my one contribution for today. Sorry.
Thank you very much. I did kind of feel that there were odd names being thrown in there that didn't tie up with what I had in front of me. Thank you very much.
It's just Steve.
Right, if I can go to my fellow councillors, Councillor Lyon.
Yeah, I think this is fairly robust. There were some questions I had though. On the risk assessment, it's fairly generic, and I was particularly interested in, and I can see there's some expertise in marshalling vehicles, but I was more concerned in marshalling people, and knowing, you know, other events, not necessarily around here, but other events where a simple trip can result in some major incidents. I'm just wondering how the skills are going to be developed, because I think it says in the risk assessment that there's certain skills, but certain skills in marshalling vehicles, I'm not sure how those skills in marshalling people are going to be dealt with.
Yeah, I think obviously with recent events in the news and what have you, people in crowded places getting crushed and so forth, it's not surprising that's on our minds. But you have to bear in mind the sort of the space that we're talking about here, and the relative dispersal and space of people moving. We're not talking about very, very tight spaces. I'm sorry that the event management plan has come across as generic. It certainly isn't. This is a very detailed piece of work that is bespoke to this event. Now, it may share characteristics with other risk assessments for other similar events, and why wouldn't it? Because particular measures have been selected that are effective to deal with the same situations that arise. So you're going to see some replication of measures, but they are absolutely tailored to what is expected to happen here. And the movement of people is very much dealt with and catered for. In terms of the skill of moving HGVs and banksman qualifications and so forth, as you can imagine, there are some very particular issues there. The movement of people is a lot more universal. People, you know, it's not the walking that's the problem. It's not the specific way that people move. It's a question of balancing their respective movements with other people to stop the crowding and the tripping and the falling and all the rest of it. So there's nothing complicated about it. You don't need a qualification in it, just need to bear it in mind. So this is a question of training, and this is a question of having the right people in the right place. You need signage. You need to tell people what they're expected to do, because most people will do what they're expected to do. And then you need to have a measure in place for those mavericks who decide to do it their own way. Those are the two balancing exercises that you need to implement. And that's all well in view. That's a question of staff expectation and training. To be fair, those are the sorts of expectations that are drilled into security staff anyway, because that's a universal problem with getting people into and out of venues, any kind of venue. So you'll find that door security are well versed in those issues through their training anyway, how to make sure people are not stampeding each other and trampling each other and trying to get into a venue, trying to get out of a venue, effective queue management, all of those sorts of things is bread and butter for your standard security door staff member. We've got 10 of them here, in addition to the parking marshals who are focused on traffic. So it is there, it is understood, it is catered for, and the routes of movement, that's key, making sure that people are using a prescribed route from A to B, muster points, emergency exit plans, how would you shepherd people from there to there if they're panicking and they're in an emergency. It's all there. It's all been thought of and it's all catered for.
Can I just jump in with a question that I had following on from that, if you don't mind, Councillor Lyon, or at least it ties in with it. My question was going to be, had Mr. Brown actually visited the site to produce this risk assessment, or was it a tabletop exercise?
No, it won't be tabletop. I won't be able to tell you off the top of my head when he went, but this is absolutely bespoke to this site, and even to the extent that he's recommended changes in the fabric of the fencing to alleviate lines of sight between there and there. Demonstrates his understanding of the site. I don't know if anyone wants to jump in and just give more specifics on that, but
I was going to say yes. Could I have an answer from the applicants as to whether he did visit the site?
Yes, he come here and he spent half a day inspecting the site, walking the perimeter, looking at all the relevant details. Went away, consulted with Hayley over lots of minor detail, and produced a bespoke report.
Right, thank you for that. Councillor Lyon, you had something else you wanted to come in on?
A couple of other points. One of them was about disability access, wheelchair access, particularly over the gravel. And the second point leading on was on page 8, it talks about on the premises only. And I'm presuming that is within the boundary that's marked on the map on page 13, that this is what on premises is defined as.
Yeah,
I think he's covered it in his reports, the safety officer. He covered the disabled aspect. He certainly consulted with us on his site visit around that and around the stone access and where should a disabled person want to attend in a wheelchair, where they would be located. We had detailed discussions about that, and I'm pretty sure it's covered in his plan.
He does make reference in the plan to having disabled access and disabled, those in wheelchairs, etc., set to one side of the it's not the staging isn't used, but whatever word is used there. So he does make reference to it. I just, like Councillor Lyon, I would be concerned whether was the gravel down at that point when he visited, because certainly the gravel and wheelchairs will not go together.
Yes, I actually think the gravel in the plan is due to be removed as well, because that was part of a concern that he had as well, that he consulted with us over.
I couldn't see any reference to that in the plan then, if it is there, but certainly that would take away that concern.
Well, it will be. We will look at that. I think I can't.
They say
if we have disabled people that want to attend, they will be. We will make a provision for it and for whatever their disability may be. We did have these discussions with our safety officer over this, and we can amend minor details should that be required. I think that was our approach. We don't know what disability may attend.
Bear in mind, these are pre-purchased tickets, so there won't be people turning up on the day. That the tickets are all pre-sold, and so there's always the facility to allow people to indicate particular needs that they have prior to attendance. And then if there's a bespoke need for particular individuals, that can be catered for if it's something that conflicts with what's on the ground, as it were.
And in fact, we did have a bit of that discussion with Hayley when we visited the site yesterday, and she did take on board that she was going to look at that further. Councillor Lyon, you had...
And the other point was that on page 8 it referred to the where is it now? It said the premises only. So I'm assuming the premises only refers to the plan on page 13, which actually indicates that area is the only area that's going to be used for the event.
I know that Mr. Grimsey updated the plan that went with the temporary event to make it very clear as to the particular area that was being used. I don't know if he wants to add anything at this stage.
Yes, Councillor. We wanted to make everybody clear of the dimensions of the event area, and therefore that's why I asked Hayley and Nick to set out the square meterage extending out from the diner, and you'll also see the patio area is actually shown on the temporary event notice plan. So all the licensable activities, the entertainment and the alcohol, will be taking place within that area shown on page 13. That is the legal position.
Okay, so to be clear, anybody wandering around with a drink would not be allowed to go off that area. Am I right?
That's correct.
Am I right in saying that? That's fine.
Thank you. Councillor Stalker?
Thank you, Chairman. No, I've just ticked off all the questions that I was going to ask, thank you. So I've got nothing that's not already been covered.
Right, thank you for that. I've got a question which perhaps is not, it might have relevance and might not. Within the document, it refers to the event obviously being ticketed only, but that details of the venue will only be given to applicants when they apply for, when they purchase a ticket. Can I just get some clarification on that?
My understanding is that the intent there is not to encourage people to turn up speculatively, to sort of prevent people from trying to get in on the day if they hadn't already bought a ticket. But again, if there's any clarification that the clients want to provide.
That's correct.
It's correct. It operates through effectively an invite-only procedure with purchasing a ticket. The event operates like that to control and to record all of the attendees. So we have a distinct record of everyone that's attended and an effective way of managing and preventing people that haven't pre-booked.
I can understand all. Sorry,
pre-booked.
I can understand that side of it. I'm just wondering how people would know to book for an event that they didn't know where it was going to take place.
It's quite commonplace with social media now, and how the ticketing websites operate. It is quite common, unfortunately. It's a bit bewildering to me, but I've actually physically seen it happen, and that's how it operates. They do not give the location out for an event until the people are confirmed that they are coming and purchased, bought and paid for. It is very similar with many things that we purchase.
Okay. All right, okay. Councillor Stalker, you wanted to come back?
No, I'm fine.
Sorry, I thought you were indicating that.
Just one point, if I can.
Councillor Lyon?
Probably not a serious one. The barriers that are going to be used, how robust are they in terms of being erected and not being capable of being pushed over? They're obviously purpose designed.
They're a specific design called Steel Shield, and if you have a look at them, the company is a single company that does not sell them. They only rent them for events. They are used for events, and they was recommended by Steve Brown. Due to his previous experience, they are flush, flat, you cannot climb them, and they are effectively bolted into the tarmac. It's a contract that is given to a company that specialises in doing events or in London.
Great, thank you.
Okay. And this might not be a question for the applicants, but has a SAG meeting taken place?
Yes.
It has. Okay, thank you. Oh yes, again, within this document that has been produced by Mr. Brown, it makes reference to catering vehicles coming on site. Is that going to be the case? This was on page 104 of the document.
No, we decided we're not going to. We're going to do it in house. We're going to use our own.
Right, thank you. So we got any other questions from officers? No, no clarification required on anything else. If I can then go to the director, if you would like to ask any questions. Is Mr. McManus there?
Well, apologies. My signal's not that great. Yeah, there's a couple of questions. I've read through the document, and I may have missed it, but I didn't see any details or numbers for SIA registered door staff. But I've just heard verbally that it was 10. Can I just confirm that what the security measures are? So we've got SIA and then banksmen and then just the other security people on duty on that day, please.
It's in the event plan.
You've got 10
We've
SIA.
We have a contractor that's going to provide, what is it, London
SIA.
Security, that's going to provide 10 SIA registered guards. And we have our own banksmen and parking attendants and first aiders and a paramedic. With an area, there is an area for the paramedic.
So what number? So we've got 10 SIA and then your own security staff. How many is that?
I think it's 13 in total, is it?
Yeah, what with the parking.
Yeah, with our parking, it says 13 staff in total.
And then how many first aid staff?
There was one first aid staff, and I think one.
No. We've got two of our own first aiders, but we're working with AFAS Training Solutions, Paul Tippett, and he's recommended that we use AGC Medical Services for the extra first aiders.
I think Mr. McManus might have frozen again. No, unfortunately, I think he has.
Is that any better, ma'am? Can you hear me?
Yes, I was just going to suggest if you took off the video, we might.
Yeah. So 10 SIA staff, 13 staff. Will any of those be doing multiple roles? So will you have banksmen as part of the staff sort of involved in first aid? And it's just, will it be one person, one job, please?
No, the banksmen are our first aiders, but we are going to use a medical company, AJC Medical Services, for the first aiders in the cafe.
Okay.
We've got Paul Tippett, who does the AF Training Solutions in Waltham Abbey, and he is going to provide us with the fire and the medical services that we need.
Oh, excellent. Thank you. That was a question I had. The other thing was post the event's finished and we have people leaving your site. I think the site, obviously from our SIG meeting, you've obviously sort of done the shielding and that and sort of the other bit. It's the bits at the end of the night that, from a policing perspective, where we find crime and disorder, those most vulnerable. And I just wanted to know what was the plan around those sort of at the end of the evening. They've had a good night, they've had a beer, they've enjoyed the performances, and then getting them away. Because obviously in your plan, you said that you mentioned 200 taxis. I presume that means
no
visit.
That was 200 people getting into approximately 60 to 80 taxis.
And obviously you've seen in my report that I contacted the local, I googled the local taxi firms, and I come up with a figure of about 20.
Yeah, I contacted Loughton, VIP and Mayflower. Mayflower can get me 30 and VIP can get me 20 plus.
Okay, so you're confident
to come here and then take people to wherever they want to go. Probably Loughton Tube Station will be where people will be going, or take them home. And also young people will have Ubers on their phone, and we do have Ubers that come to the site.
Okay, so
we can stagger them leaving slowly enough to make sure they, the exit safely. Yeah, they won't be all walking out onto the highway.
They will not be exiting onto the public highway. We have 2 perimeter areas that we can contain and control the flow and the exit. So we have a very conservative plan to be able to exit. We're not anticipating all of the 100% of the people to depart at the same time either, which is how the event sort of operates.
Okay, thank you for all the questions I had. Thank you.
Can I just follow on from one of those you referred to young people? I just wonder what sort of target age group you were aiming for on this event.
25.
Sorry?
25 to 40, 45 years old.
Right, thank you.
And there's some reliving their youth with the music that they listen to, really.
Right. Thank you. And that point then, if I can now turn again to Mr. McManus to present your objection to the committee.
Thank you, ma'am. I'll stay off camera because it appears to be a better solution. Pretty much as from the previous application, the objection remains the same. It was the event on the 30th of August, which we've already spoken about, so I don't intend to go into that any further. The vehicles moving, yes, my concerns have been addressed in as much as no vehicle traffic 2 hours before and 2 hours after, and no movement on the site. I still have concerns because of such close proximity to the M25 in people wandering off, particularly at the end of the event, sort of under the influence of alcohol. And you've heard from the applicants what they intend to do. I don't know how successful that will be, but that is my concern, people making their way onto the M25. The banksman qualifications we've spoken about and you've highlighted as well versus what are their experiences in dealing with people, but there's SIA registered security staff there that is their job. So the taxiing ranks, yes, I come up with a figure of about 20 to 25. I did not contact Lighton Taxi, so they've made that arrangement. Public transport obviously is a bit of an issue in as much as buses in that area. It's generally agreed just that it's a non-starter. But trains getting people away, sort of ending, I think. I don't have those times, did have previously. And yeah, the concerns remain the same as from the first TENS application, and that would be my submission.
You're on mute, Chairman.
Apologies. I don't know whether there's anything that you want to highlight from the first TENS application, because the reality is you have a new committee hearing this application now. Anything that you haven't said earlier that perhaps, sorry, Rosie, you want to?
Yes, this is a brand new application. It should be treated on its own merits. So if he has anything he wants to say, he has to be based on the evidence he has on the whatever he presented in this letter. Okay, is whatever he presented. It can't be added to. It's what's there on the day.
No, it's just whether he wanted to highlight anything else on the basis that he is talking to a new committee, not the one that heard it last time.
Okay.
No, ma'am.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Any questions from the applicants to Mr. McManus?
No, thank you. No, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Members, any questions for Mr. McManus? No? In that case, I can now go back to Mr. McManus and ask, is there anything else that you wish to make as a final statement, but not bringing any new information into the statement?
No, ma'am, I think we've said it over the last sort of nearly 3 hours.
Thank you very much. And similarly, for the applicants, any final statement without bringing any new issues in?
Just very, very quickly, Madam Chair, because the police officer is saying, well, the concerns remain the same, but they don't, do they? Manifestly not. I've just done a quick list and I've ticked them all off. So he said for the HGV movement, that's addressed the problem. Banksmen are okay, taxis are okay, public transport is okay. No one's suggesting buses come into the frame. The August 2020 incident we've dealt with in quite some detail. There is no evidence there that could preclude a temporary event like this. So the only thing that remains on the list is drunken people wandering onto the M25. Now, if that is a good enough reason to call the whole thing off, I would be very surprised. I invite you to find that it's not. And I invite you to find that on the scale of risk, the balance of risk, the scales tip very heavily in favour of these licensees who've put together a comprehensive plan. And there's no reason to believe that anything will go wrong with it. That's it, really, unless I can help you.
Okay, thank you very much. And I don't think any other officers of EFTC have got any comments or anything else to add. And other members of the panel okay at this point in time?
Right.
Right, thank you very much. In that case, as before, if I can ask that apart from those of us who are staying together to discuss the application, if the rest of the attendees can be put into the waiting room.
Okay, will do, Chairman. Please wait a minute. If he's there.
Webcast has been restarted.
Thank you.
Right. Just.
I think we're all here now, Chairman.
Apart from the fact that we seem to have Jean rather than Richard.
It's all right.
Then can you please take off Mrs. Morgan?
No, I
she's
can't.
Not, you can't. She's not. Okay.
She's
okay.
She's gone. Right. Thank you for just coming back.
Okay.
Yeah, I realise that I'm sure you realise that we haven't reached a decision yet. We just have one or two questions that have been raised in our discussion just now that we'd just like some clarification on. The first one is around the food distribution, bearing in mind that and the ordering of food and drink, bearing in mind that the area available is quite constrained. And we just wondered what arrangements would be in place to allow that to go through forward safely and easily.
Right, I'm going to need the clients to come in directly on this one.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, the food order will be taken from the bar that goes directly into the kitchen. And we will have waitresses taking the food to the people on the tables where they'll be.
And drinks orders
from the bar. Well, you know the bar I showed you yesterday. That's where the orders.
Yeah. Now the reason we're asking this question is because we have concerns that it is a very limited space, and that just wondering how you will manage the queues. That may.
I showed you the other sides to the bar, so we've got about 4 different sides where you can take an order at the bar.
So you will have all 4 sides. Well, it's not 4 sides, but all 4 areas open.
Yeah, open. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much for that. The other question that we talked around yesterday was toilets, and we did express concerns. And again, the question is being raised again now as to whether there are sufficient toilets for women, females on the site at the time, and also the question around providing a separate toilet as is set out in the assessments for the catering staff.
Yeah, we will have to hire a portaloo for the catering staff to be put at the back door where the kitchen is. And then we've got sufficient toilets for the attendees.
and you feel that the numbers are sufficient for women. I
Yeah.
know that the risk assessment sets out numbers.
Yeah, so
but
you've got, if we went half and half, you've got 3 WCs for the females, 1 WC for the males, and then urinals. And we've got enough urinals for the men outside.
And in having those 4 WCs, does that include the disabled toilet?
Yes, that includes the disabled.
So in fact, it's going to be 1 disabled toilet and 3 others.
No, because we can use the disabled toilet as the single toilet, which is the men's toilet. And then we've got the 3 toilets that are inside. And then we've got urinals outside. There's no reason
Okay,
that...
thank you very much for that. Sorry, I lost you. And the other one, which again, it's relating to what's written in the risk assessment papers and others. It talks about waste containers, and you've got obviously those large plastic waste facilities outside of within the area. But the assessments suggest that they should be metal containers, not plastic. Had you given that any thought?
No, I don't know why that is. We've got 7 of those large bins on site. We've never had a problem. Yeah.
But they are all plastic.
Yeah, they're heavy duty waste bins.
As I say, it's just what is in your risk assessment, and it does refer to having metal waste containers.
We can ask them. We can change them to metal, I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, as I say, having got the risk assessment, and that is partly what we'll be basing our considerations on. It was just to clarify on that. I just checking with Councillor Lyon and Councillor Stalker. I haven't missed anything. Councillor Lyon?
Just something, disabled access, the disabled access audit. I don't know whether your risk assessment includes a disabled access audit, which look, rather than making it bespoke again, depending on ticket sales, whether there needs to be an additional audit on the disability access, because the Equality Act of 2010 is quite extensive. I just wondered how that's being discharged.
Yeah, if I can just jump in there, the consultant, Mr. Brown, who's put the event plan together, will be very well versed in the Equality Act. That's going to be something that permeates a lot of his activities. So he won't have ignored it by any standards. If that's something that we can take back and double check and review to make sure there's no issue with that, and things like toilets as well. If these are concerns in the form of advisories or informatives being raised by the committee, that can be well taken on board. I'm hoping it wouldn't result in a refusal, but if these are advisories that are coming forward that should be double checked, I'm sure they can be double checked.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that. As I say, thank you for coming back just to clarify some of those points. And if I can now ask that the webcast is stopped and that others are put into the waiting room again.
Okay, will do.
Are you sure that there are no vehicles that allow any transport?
Who?
Right. I'm not sure that we've got everybody back at the moment.
Chairman, we have everybody that was in the waiting room.
Okay.
Yeah, except him. Okay, Mr. Grim. Okay.
Okay. Right. Thank you for your forbearance while we had our discussion around this TENS application. As before, I will read out the decision sheet This is a decision sheet relating to a temporary event notice under the Licensing Act 2003 for Junction 26 Diner, Skillet Hill Farm, Honey Lane, Waltham Abbey, EN9QU. The subcommittee has considered the application for a 10 to be granted for the period sought in the application as per the address that I have just given. We have taken into account the 4 licensing objectives, the relevant written and oral representations, the Council's licensing policy, and the Secretary of State's guidance, and resolved that it is not appropriate for the promotion of the licensing objectives to serve a counter notice. We gave full consideration to the objection from the Essex Police Licensing Unit with regards to the prevention of crime and disorder, public safety, and the prevention of public nuisance, but have decided that the licensing objectives are not sufficiently undermined by the holding of the proposed event. However, in order to minimise the potential for the prevention of crime and disorder, public safety, and protection of children from harm, we have also determined to attach conditions as per the variation of the existing premises licence as agreed on the 13th of May 2021. During our deliberations in private session, our advisory officers gave us no further advice. Regarding appeal, the applicants and the objectors are reminded of their right to appeal to the Magistrates' Court within 21 days of the date of the written notification of this decision. And please note that no appeal may be brought later than 5 working days before the day on which the event period specified in the 10 begins. And that will be signed by myself as chairman of this subcommittee on the 13th of May 2021. So that concludes the formal part of the meeting. The application is granted. I might just say in passing that in granting this, the applicants do have the opportunity now to take the opportunity to prove that this is an event that can be run without problems, and we will have the opportunity to see how that goes ahead on the 26th of June. I see that Councillor Holmes has his hand up, but in fact you have no actual authority to be able to take part in this meeting as much as anything else, because you are here as a member of the public. Waltham Abbey Town Council did not put any objection into this application. So with that, I now come to item 7 on the agenda, which is the exclusion of public and press. I don't believe we have any reasons to exclude the public and press on this agenda.
No, Chairman.
Thank
No,
you.
Chairman.
So I closed the meeting at 2:22. And thank you all very much for your attendance. Obviously, it has been a long session, but
Thank you, Chair.
there was a lot of information to be covered in this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, councillors.
Thank you.